Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Tranel from Cuba City, Wisconsin, a small organic dairy farmer on the southwest corner of the state down here. And I'm here to talk to you today about how we use some different small grains as forage sources for our dairy farms and why we do that. The first slide I want to share today is just an overview of why we grow these different small grains for our forage sources. One of the big reasons is we were looking at different ways to incorporate our crop rotations and to grow a little bit more tonnage on the same acres and to get some tonnage out of different seasons of the year instead of just trying to grow stuff all summer long. We wanted to get some fall growth and some spring growth to make ourselves a little more resilient to different weather changing patterns. And then take advantage of more of the growing days. We've had some good winters the past couple of years that some winter rye and stuff like that has grown tremendously throughout the winter, and we've had some awful winters that it hasn't, but it's also nice just to have it in the ground just in case. Another reason we have been doing it is just keep the soil covered, less erosion, more nutrient uptake, and a lot less weed pressure if we can keep that soil covered all year round. I mean, then the third biggest reason is it helps us keep our ration costs down. We can get these small grain silages grown a lot cheaper per pound of feed than we can with our alfalfa and some other kind of plants like that. How we got into it, we kind of just started off, I think, like most people do, with growing some winter rye and some winter triticale and trying things like that. And it worked out good as nurse crops and as cover crops. And then we kind of went into doing some summer annuals that we'll talk about here, some sorghum Sudan grass and a few different kinds of those. And once we started liking those, we just kind of went full board and all in on this stuff. And then another reason why we were already growing a lot of wheat and barley as grains, but we didn't like how it kind of just sat fallow and dried out through the best growing months of the summer. So we decided to start cutting those off early, chopping them, and get something else growing back up there because the grain portion of it wasn't really bringing a whole lot of value back to the dairy. So here's the 5 different types of small grains that we utilize on our farm. We used winter wheat, triticale, winter rye, and Italian ryegrass. There's a few different kinds of stuff there that we use. And then oats, and then sorghum Sudan grass, and some summer annuals. And that one we've tried a big variety of things and have found a few that work pretty well, a few that don't really work so well, and some that are in between depending on what your goals are. So the first one we're going to talk about here is just winter wheat. I think the biggest pro of it and the real biggest reason everybody uses it is because it's so winter hardy, and then it's also pretty easy kill off for the next crop. We right now just chop it off every June or so and feed it to our dry cows. It works out great in those rations because it's pretty low potassium feed. It's a pretty low energy feed, but man, it gets those rumens working. Another reason it's pretty advantageous is that it's pretty slow to maturity. It's not like rye where as soon as it hits 80 degrees, it's headed out in 3-4 days and you kind of have a small window to hit. With winter wheat, the window's a little bit bigger. The cons of it, there's a little bit lower yield potential there if you're going to chop it off. And then it also needs to be in early because the winter wheat's growth really depends on its fall tillering. So our biggest use has always been in ground that we're transitioning over to organic. We usually throw it in winter wheat the first fall we can get on it, and then go to seed some alfalfa the next couple of years that we got to sell the feed off of. Another reason we use it is if we're going to establish some contour strips and we need something to keep the ground covered for the fall or while we're doing that. And then we've also been using it in our rotations behind weak alfalfa stands. So maybe we might take off the first 3 cuttings of alfalfa and then throw in some winter wheat. Or if we get some corn salads chopped early enough, we've been throwing in winter wheat as well. The second one is oats, which I think have been used as a nurse crop and a forage crop by dairy farmers for quite a long time. The biggest pro for this, I think, is you get a lot of early season forage growth. It can be established any time of the year, and it's pretty quick growing. I mean, it's got a very large seed, and you get it on the ground with some rain and some good weather, and it just takes right off. The big cons of it is it's got a pretty limited yield potential, I think, and then it's not winter hardy at all. It pretty much got to go in and get cut before it gets too cold out. So we use it a lot in nurse crops if we're going to nurse alfalfa stand or a pasture stand. We've used it to patch areas of overrun pasture, and we've gambled with it in the middle of summer sometimes if we got some ground that's kind of sitting empty and we want to try to squeeze out another crop of stuff. We've thrown oats out there in August, September to see if we can just get a crop off. It seems like about half the time we get enough out there to get a crop off, and another half the time it just ends up as a ground cover and something to plow back under in the spring, which is never a bad thing either. The next one is spring and winter triticale. This is probably one of my favorite ones to use if you can get in the fall early enough. The biggest pros of it, it's got a huge quality potential and it's got a great yield potential. The biggest thing against it, though, is that it is kind of like winter wheat, where it really depends on fall tillering. So a lot of people will follow this with after their corn silage, but if you don't get it off in time and get this in time, it's not going to grow very well. And then we've also used it as a nurse crop for our spring seeded alfalfa sometimes too, if we don't want to use oats. It seems like we usually go about 50-50 with what we do. But with this winter triticale, if we can get this in the fall, I love feeding this forage. And then winter rye, I think this is one of the easiest ones to start getting used to. My theory here is that if you get it in the ground, it'll grow. So this picture here you can see was from 2019. We seeded some after Christmas in 2019, and it came up and we got a very nice crop off it. It probably produced a better crop for us that year than the stuff we seeded down in the fall. It's just kind of how winter rye grows. And then another great thing about it is it makes a pretty good sod and it suppresses a lot of weeds because it grows so quick and so thick. The cons of it, though, it's pretty difficult to kill out without chemicals, I think, and it can also have a quality downside because it heads out very quickly as soon as it hits about 75, 80. It seems like it'll grow fine until you get one of those nice days and it just wants to go to seed pretty quickly and reproduce. Now this going forward, though, I have seen a lot of people start to use this in no-till situations. If you let it head out all the way and they can kill it with a roller crimper. I've seen some success with that, but I've also seen a lot of people not have very good success with that. So that just kind of depends. One way we usually use this is that if we get corn silage chopped off kind of late and we need to get some manure hosed, we'll put this down afterwards just to kind of hold the nutrients there, whether we're going to plow it back under or take it as a forage crop. Usually just depends on how it grows in the winter we have. I also like to plant a lot of this around the dairy every fall because it seems that in the spring we want to get our cows out or our heifers out on the pasture. This is the first stuff that always pops up and is ready to graze. Another one we can talk about is sorghum or sorghum Sinan grass, and there's a lot of mixes you can use here between them and a lot of different types you can find out there in the market. The pros of this, it's got a huge quality potential, it's got a huge yield potential, and it's great for weed suppression, especially if you can get it seeded at a good time because it'll outcompete all those later summer weeds. The cons, it likes dry feet and really hot summers. So if you get some wet summers like we had in 2019, it doesn't grow quite the best. And then the quality on this can also escape pretty fast, just like the winter rye, because of how rapid it grows. I mean, if you got some 95, 100-degree weather, this stuff will add on 4 inches a day. Where we use it on rotation, we use it quite a bit to break up our corn on corn situations and maybe go to corn and then a summer annual like this and back to corn the next year. We've also used it as kind of a cover crop. If we want to fall seed some alfalfa, we'll put this down in the spring, get a cutting off it, and then put our alfalfa down in late August. One thing we've been doing the last couple of years is starting to grow some other kind of plants with this and make it more of a cocktail mix. We've seen pretty good success with that. It just kind of depends on getting a good establishment and figuring out what works in your area. We've also had some good luck no-tilling this into winter wheat after we take it off and chop that off. We've had good luck no-tilling this into weak alfalfa stands after we take the first cutting off. We've no-tilled this in and then just had a thicker stand to cut that with. And there's a lot of different uses like that you can go through in your rotations just to stretch out your rotations and use it. And there's a lot of different types of grasses you can grow with this. There's some that are kind of on a 3-cut system, some that are on a 2-cut system. There's some stuff that's photosensitive, and you could use that as a 1-cut system for some dry cow and some heifer rations. And there's a lot of flexibility around grasses like this. So why we got into this was because we needed to figure out a way to grow a lot more high quality forages. I mean, farming economics for dairymen, I think, basically comes down to 3 things on an agronomic point of view. And it's your ability to grow a lot of high quality forages with a lot of high quality digestible fiber, the ability to grow a lot of corn cheaply to feed to the cows, and then weed control, especially for organic. So as our herd size grew the past few years, we just need to figure out a way to grow a lot more forages and to do it rather cheaply, because we got burned so many times on winter killed alfalfa in the winters of 18 and 19. And then, I mean, everybody remembers what 2019 was like and all that rain. So with our old crop rotation, we can only keep about 25% of our land in corn, and we needed to figure out a way how to make that up towards like 40% with our crop rotations. And this was adding all these grains and just helped out tremendously like that. Our alfalfa stands was just kind of a no-win situation, because we would spend all the money seeding them, getting them established, and then it seemed like either that we'd get winter killed out too soon and we'd have to go back to corn, or we'd have these great stands that were lasting, but by the time they got to 3 or 4 years, we needed to plow them under to get more corn grown anyways. So this was our crop rotation before we did this, before we got into all these small grain forages. It was basically corn, a seeding year, and then hopefully 3, maybe 4 years of hay, and then wash, rinse, repeat. That's about all we did. We always got one good crop of corn and it went right back to seeding. But that was a lot of cost to incur for just one crop of corn. It didn't give us much flexibility for our manure, because then we were only really had about 2 years we could go on that land with manure, and the rest of it we didn't like hosing to or putting stuff on. So now we split our land base into a couple different rotations. If there's ground we can hose manure on, we like to go our year of corn and then go to a winter triticale or ride, depending on what time we get that corn silage off. The next year we'll go into a cocktail mix, and then we'll keep that rotation up for 2 or 3 times. And then if we got to seed it back down to alfalfa after that, we can. And that gives us a lot of flexibility about where we can hose our manure to, the times of year we can get it on, because we can get it on after that rye comes off, we can get it on after the corn silage comes off, we can get it on between the cocktail cuts, between the sorghum Sudan grass cuts. There's a lot of more flexibility there with what we can do with our manure. And then with our further ground away, we've kind of reverted back to our old rotation, but we're using some winter wheat and some photosensitive Sudan grass on our poorer ground. And then we're doing a lot of grazing on that ground also. And we're not really seeding so much as alfalfa, and a lot more just heavy grass mixes, so we can try to keep the stands 5, 6, 7 years if they last that long. This was a slide I kind of put together to show the dry matter tons per acre that we can grow on our old crop rotation versus our new one. And so, I mean, this is what our averages have been the past few years. If you can grow 7.5 tons of dry matter on your corn silage crop, that's a really good year. And then for us, we just really didn't have a lot of luck in our seeding years growing a lot of dry matter until we started incorporating more of these small grains. And then for the alfalfa stands, yeah, we used 4.5 and 4 in the second year, and you can see year to year that just keeps going down. But so on a 5-year averaging, we were averaging about 22 tons of dry matter per the 5 years. Then with this new crop rotation, if we go to corn and then the rye with the sorghum sedan, back to corn, the rye with the sorghum sedan, through the 5-year rotation of that, we were averaging about 34 tons of dry matter per acre through the 5 years, and that's about over 12 tons of dry matter increase per acre. And we had more flexibility with what to do with our manure. So it was kind of a win-win situation for everyone and for all parties involved. Harvesting these small grains, for us, it's simplest just to cut, merge, and chop, or to graze. The cut height pretty much depends on what grasses you have in there and what you're going after, but most of these are just one cut anyway, so you can cut them off pretty low. Most of them can be pretty easily baled and wrapped if that fits better to your operation, and then with every dairy forage, it's just always a quality issue versus a quantity issue, and then basing in the weather. But the big thing is, so you can grow all this random forage now, but that's only good if you can do something with it. And so on this slide, it's just a graph of all the different nutrient compositions the NRC has put out for these different small grains. And you can take a look at like the crude protein levels and the NDF levels of these different ones, but this is why the Triticale is my favorite, because you still got quite a bit of protein in it, and the NDF is just tremendous on it compared to the alfalfa. And the ash content on all these, it'll really vary greatly depending on how you harvest it, what you do with the harvest, and just the conditions. But we're going to show you some feed examples of ones that are even better than these things, than this NRC graph. And then what we really need to do is just match the silages that we're growing now with the correct groups of animals. So we have a pretty decent advantage here that we can feed different forages, different groups of animals, and we don't have a one group TMR all the time. So to feed a lot of these grasses to lactating cows, everything needs to be harvested boot stage to late boot stage. And there's a possible way to make some at milk stage, but it's pretty hard. And you can use it in rations to replace corn silage or haylage, just kind of depending on what your forage situation is on other acres and what your goals are. If you're going to cut these things for heifers, you're better off letting it head out and get to milk stage and just go after more of the tonnage, because you can make up almost all your heifer rations just off one of these grasses. And then dry cows, we always typically avoid anything at spring harvest with them, but we've had a lot of good luck chopping off wheat silage in June at a dough stage, and that's made some just awesome dry cow feed, especially for pre-fresh rations, because the potassium on it is very low. Digestibility of that fiber is still pretty high, but it's a lot of room and stuff for them to eat, and it does a great job with that. On our lactating rations, we're typically feeding most of these at a 5 to 10 pound of dry matter inclusion rate. If we get some Triticale that's really, really good, or some summer cocktail that's really, really good, we'll maybe go a little bit higher and take out some corn silage and take out some purchased protein. And then in our later lactation, we use a lot of these, even up to 20 pounds of dry matter. The feed has plenty of energy and plenty of protein for the cows, and it has reduced our late lactation ration cost quite a bit. Heifer rations, we kind of just slowly balance them here, and we look for feed that's about 60% TDN for our pregnant heifers, and target stuff that's about 65% TDN for our smaller ones. So using these small grain forages and just a little bit of corn silage and concentrate, it's pretty easy to make up a bulk of these heifer diets. And the dry cow diets, again, we just don't like to feed spring forages because of the potassium and to get the decad balances. But we've had a lot of good luck with the dough stage and wheat. So bringing it all back together and why we've chosen to go this route of growing a lot of small grain forages, it just helps out our crop rotation quite a bit. We can grow way more feed on the same amount of acres. We keep the ground cover all year round, and we have a lot more flexibility what to do with our manure.
Okay, so appreciate that, Josh. There is one question in the chat box here for Mike from Illinois. What species are you using in the cocktail mix in pounds per acre of each one? Josh actually got caught up with some cold weather on the farm, and so is going to be a little late joining us if he can actually join us at all. But being tied to the farm, a little bit myself. I know there's a lot of like sorghum Sudan grass. There's different types of clovers, and I'm not exactly sure which ones he actually goes with, but I think I can actually try to find out that cocktail mix, and if I can get it before the end of the program, I'll throw that in the chat box.